we must be prepared to ask profound and quote-unquote heretical questions. Not heretical against religion, heretical against anti-religion as well. We must be prepared to question whether in our system of secularism we have not incorporated a heavy dose of the sacred, that which cannot be understood except in terms of theology. We must be prepared to question the values of all norms, including those that we cherish and consider the foundations of our thinking. My argument in its full range is that secularism is not sustainable, because as its core and constitutive structures, it is epistemologically highly problematic and self-contradictory. It is, I argue, incoherent. I must emphasize at the same time that this does not translate into an endorsement of any particular existing system today. Secularist manifestations of life have always existed in human society. Even in the most religious of cultures, some segments of society, and I have in mind also the Islamic culture in history, some segments of society, and especially segments of the political and economic elites, have led to what might be today called secular existence. But this is not the kind of secularism we are discussing here. The difference is a highly qualitative difference. Modern secularism is a paradigmatic ethos. It's a paradigmatic structural ethos built into our way of life, of our way of living. Secularism was born out of fragmentation. For without that fragmentation, it would not have arisen in the first place. And let me be clear about what I mean by fragmentation. I do not mean by it having something split asunder. That is true too. But fragmentation here is the tearing apart of an organic piece from a certain body, a piece that makes the body whole and sound. Fragmentation is the rendering of something as incomplete, closer to describing it as lacking a unity of vision, as conflicted, as existing in an epistemologically shattered world. Secularism thus comes apart as a fragmented entity because it was stripped of its holistic background of value. Or rather, I should say, it is the result of this operation of stripping. As a mode of governance, and thus as dependent on what has been called brute facts, secularism does not admit except that which is verifiable and quantifiable. Of course, values cannot be measured, and therefore they are rejected. Secularism accepts only that which is verifiable and quantifiable. Anything that cannot be quantified, measured, and or verified cannot be the basis of action. If the main business of secularism is to keep religion, quote unquote, protected in the private sphere, a myth, as we will see soon, then we ought to evaluate it on this ground, namely, the division between the public and the private spheres. What we find here is pure indeterminacy, where the line of separation between these two spheres keeps shifting according to contingency. This indeterminacy, whereby the boundaries of the private sphere may endlessly continue to shift, is the hallmark of the contingencies of the political, where no argument can fix any discourse permanently, and no principle, especially a moral principle, can control the behavior of any social group. For any such moral argument turns out to be at the end nothing but a political argument. Moral fixity is never to be had. Due to very particular historical developments in Europe, a particular concept of sovereignty came into being, one that was specifically pitted against any non-anthropocentric source of power. The sovereignty of the modern European state was defined precisely in new theologically counter-theological terms. Terms that rejected traditional metaphysics in favor of new ones. This is not to say that the new sovereignty of the modern state, or the sovereignty of popular will, because the modern state is a nation state, has amended or cancelled a theology or a metaphysic in favor of what we popularly call a scientific or a rationalist view of the world. We have no way of truly understanding secularism unless we treat it as organically integral to sovereignty. Secularism is a method of state governance. It is certainly a method that intends to fragment, because this is how the state must rule. Any social or political formation that is not loyal in its relevant constitution to the operative imperatives of the modern state must be broken up to accommodate the configuration of that state and its priorities. Any social formation, whether a clan, a tribe, or any organization that demands its own loyalty, is deemed a threat, and thus gradually, if not abruptly, must be broken up by the power of the sovereign. The state cannot live with competing loyalties, no more than it can live under any other's rule. Hence the meaning of its sovereign will. That's exactly what sovereignty is.